Hello, and welcome to today's short lecture on cognitive reserve. So, what is cognitive reserve? Why are we here today? So, basically, all cognitive reserve is figuring out how the brain is able to react to damage. So, for instance, you can have two people, and each can have similar or identical issues with their brain, being that the prefrontal cortex could show atrophy or the hippocampus can show atrophy. But for some of them, they'll be doing just fine, and others, you can see the impact of that damage. And what cognitive reserve is basically the ability to work through the damage, and even if your brain has damage, that's able to perform at a high level. So this was first kind of figured out kind of in tandem with some of the research that was done that we heard earlier with like Reuter-Lorenz and Cabeza, that the brain's able to kind of re-network itself to deal with damage that it has. And cognitive reserve is very much due to that plasticity. So with reserve models, there's two different types. So one is a more passive model, which means that your brain has so much mass, and once it loses a certain amount of mass, once you hit a certain threshold, that's when deficits will begin to surface. So the idea is your brain is this big and it can handle this much damage before it starts to show issues. So that's one way of looking at cognitive reserve. But the cognitive reserve hypothesis that's pushed by Stern is more that the brain actively tries to cope with damage via compensation. So very similar to what we were talking about earlier with Cabeza and Reuter-Lorenz, in that the brain kind of restructures itself to be able to deal with issues that it has. And it's very much the point of the author here, Stern, that cognitive reserve isn't only about having extra brain mass, but it's able to be plastic and change, to be malleable, to change itself to fit well in the environment. So what are some of the factors of cognitive reserve? So kind of what's going on the back end? Well, first off, it has to do with the anatomy, and it has to do with anatomical structures being variable, able to do different things, being flexible. So that's pretty much like the key point of cognitive reserve. But there's also some important ways to deal with it, and we'll talk about some of these now. So definitely when you're thinking about cognitive reserve, some of the things that have been shown to increase cognitive reserve, and we'll get into some cognitively stimulating experience, so making sure that you're engaged and doing something interesting with your life. Having a rich and interesting environment around you is important. Exercise is important. And what's been interesting is that we've actually learned that for the size of the hippocampus, stimulating environment, exercise is important. And we learned this super early when we were studying rats, that rats that are put in a cage that had more interesting stuff to do with access to exercise equipment, like an exercise wheel, tend to have larger hippocampus on both sides. Also, other things that are good for cognitive reserve: education. So years of education is often seen as a proxy for cognitive reserve, and more recently, we've seen that being able to speak multiple languages is also an important piece. So the cognitive reserve literature is deeply tied into dementia literature, because essentially what they found is that there could be two individuals with very similar issues going on inside their brain. So when you're talking about dementia, you're looking at a couple things. You're looking at beta amyloid plaques, so a deposit of beta amyloid, and then also what they call neurofibrillary tangles, which are basically like the neurons kind of choking each other out. And those are some of the metrics that you see. However, you could have people with the same amount of pathology, so their brains look the same, but they act very differently. And that's where cognitive reserve comes into play. That basically, that for one individual, they could have moderate signs of dementia and act normal. And for another individual, they could have moderate signs of dementia and act as though they were further along in the progression. So important. What are some more ways to increase our cognitive reserve? So one of the best ways to focus on it is by thinking about your body first. So as you probably know by now, the brain is a highly vascularized region, meaning that there's tons of blood vessels in the brain. So naturally, things that are related to cardiovascular disease will lead to problems, whether it's problems with the heart, you're talking about strokes, heart attacks, but then also like precursors to these two. We found that some of these biomarkers can be predictive of what are called microinfarctions. So an infarction is a bleed, so like little brain bleeds, like mini strokes. And that tends to be like a pretty big predictor of cognitive health. So ways to improve your cardiovascular health is focus on the body. So making sure to take control if you have hypertension, so blood pressure is too high, controlling weight, staying away from smoking if possible, and keeping your lipids in check. So many of these you can do just through changes in life, but there's also different medications that can help with this. So to make sure that like your cholesterol levels, your lipids are good, a blood test is a good way to look at this. And also important is ways to counteract brain aging. So we've talked about some things that are helpful, and physical activity kind of comes up again and again. Education comes up again and again. But one that I haven't touched on yet, social network. So social support is one of the most highly correlated variables with brain health. And there was an interesting study that followed people throughout their lives, and what they found was that people with stronger social networks tended to have more cognitive reserve. And we just think that it has to do with engagement with life and interests. And you can see how physical activity is going to be related with everything related to the cardiovascular system. So if you think about it, anything that's going to help your cardiovascular system is probably going to help your brain. So kind of keep that in mind. Also, alcohol abuse can be a problem. There's some syndromes, Korsakoff's syndrome, that if you drink way too much alcohol can lead to brain damage. And then also just having a good diet is important. So being able to maintain a healthy weight, having foods that aren't way too high in sodium and saturated fats, cholesterols, that would be important too. So yeah, basically in a nutshell, that's what cognitive reserve is. So that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching.